There are few figures in Arthurian legend as mysterious as the Lady of the Lake. She appears briefly, cloaked in mist and enchantment, handing swords to kings, guiding knights to their destinies, then vanishing without warning. Some say only one lady guarded Arthur's realm from the lake's shore, while others insist there were several, each carrying a piece of the legend. People often call her Nimue or Viviane, though her true identity shifts with each telling. For simplicity's sake, we'll call her Viviane. She is most remembered for one deed, placing Excalibur in Arthur's hands. Yet her part in the legend goes far beyond that moment. She guarded magic, guided powerful sorcerers, and acted from beyond the mortal realm. Some saw her as a friend, others saw her as a cunning schemer, but one fact remains. Without her, Arthur's tale would not have taken the course it did. She raised Camelot's finest knight. She imprisoned the era's mightiest wizard. She existed at the border of two realms, where power and fate often overlapped. And when Camelot's dream crumbled, she was there, prepared to take back what had always belonged to her. This is Viviane's story, the Lady of the Lake from Arthurian myth. No one truly knows Viviane's origin. Some claim she was Fae-born, a child of the other world raised in a magical lake beyond the reach of time. Others say she began as a mortal in the forests of Brittany, but was changed forever by magic. Then there are those who say she was never born, that she simply always existed, watching kingdoms rise and fall until her moment to guide mortal fate arrived. But one truth is clear. Viviane did not dwell among ordinary people. She lived in a secret lake, unseen by mortal eyes, where the waters were never calm and the fog never cleared. This was no normal body of water. It served as a bridge between humanity and a more ancient place, where old practices lived on and magic still bloomed. Some who ventured there vanished forever. Others came back altered, blessed or doomed by the lake's power. Only a rare few even glimpsed Viviane, and even fewer grasped who she truly was. She was not merely a phantom or a sorceress. She was the Lady of the Lake, protector of hidden magic and keeper of objects not fit for human possession. Her appearances were rare, yet her impact was clear. Some thought her a deity, guarding the delicate line of magic and power in the world. Others spoke her name quietly, fearing she could twist destiny. Yet before all that, before Camelot stood and warriors vied for power, Viviane was in her lake, observing the world. Her part was still unwritten, but the events guiding Arthur's legend were already unfolding, and when her moment arrived, she would emerge from the fog into legend. Her tale was only starting. Viviane's existence was as secretive as her abilities. Very few people witnessed her, and those who did described her as a woman beyond the reach of aging. Many said her hair was long and dark, either brown or black, and her face was calm yet unreadable. Her gaze was piercing, shifting from deep blue to silver, hinting she had lived for ages. Her skin was pale and sometimes seemed to glow, as though she belonged to the lake's reflection more than to the human world. Her robes sparkled like silver and seemed to blend with the mist. Yet some stories describe her with hair like golden sunlight on water, or auburn strands suggesting a fairy heritage. Despite how she was portrayed, one thing was clear. She was not of this world, yet she still influenced it. Viviane was unlike any other sorceress. She wasn't fierce like Morgana, nor tied to mortal rulers like ancient druids. She didn't desire authority just to reign, nor did she wield magic to manipulate fates for fun. Her power was old, measured, and used with care. Unlike Merlin, who walked among people, guiding rulers and shaping history, Viviane stayed distant, keeping to her secret lake, only joining the mortal world when she had to. People both feared and respected her, not for savage power, but for her deep grasp of destiny. She never used magic recklessly or sought praise for her deeds. Each time she acted, it was precise. Whenever she spoke, her words mattered. Her magic was never used for display. It was a power, a method to mold the world according to her vision. Yet to grasp Viviane's impact, one must see who she was behind her secretive facade. She was a puzzle, someone whose goals stayed hidden even from those she helped. She didn't explain herself or speak about matters she deemed small. Her voice was steady and composed, rarely swayed by the worries of ordinary people. Some found her cold, removed, and apart, as if she lived beyond their reality. Yet under that calm front was a deeper complexity. She was neither unfeeling nor unkind. She had witnessed how humans climbed and fell, how greed poisoned them, how even the best hearts could be warped by power. Because of this, she stayed wary. She rarely offered trust. Any who came to her for help had to show they deserved it, and anyone who crossed her seldom received another chance. She could show kindness, but there was always a purpose. She could act harshly, but only if it was truly necessary. She knew how delicate balance could be, and to keep it, she sometimes made choices that confused others. She didn't allow feelings to blur her thinking, but even she felt the burden of her actions at times. Patience was her strongest tool, especially when others rushed ahead driven by their needs. Viviane stayed still, aware that time was a power even magic couldn't fully command, but it could be endured. She was more than a mere enchantress. She was a guardian, a keeper of things too potent for mortal grasp. Though she often seemed inactive, her duties influenced the core of Arthur's saga. Excalibur, the blade that came to symbolize Arthur, not made for ruin, but for fate, was placed under her care. She alone chose when and to whom it should go, and in time she would reclaim it herself. The lake she called home was far from ordinary. It served as a doorway to an older realm. She made sure its secrets and powers never slipped into unworthy hands. She did not govern mankind, but Viviane shaped their world in ways few understood. She offered blessings, posed challenges, and decided who deserved to handle magic. People craving power without sense often clashed with her. She was neither a monarch, nor did she reign from a throne with an army. Her reach surpassed that of any ruler, because she controlled not commands or wars, but the invisible powers shaping reality. Viviane's magic was unique among spellcasters. She did not depend on texts or chance, nor was she confined by human limits. Her ability was entwined with nature itself, tied to the hidden energies that guided reality. She could vanish in a heartbeat, unseen by any she chose to hide from. She could change her look, moving between shapes so smoothly that even the sharpest gaze missed it. Some claimed she could become a swan, a shining fish, or even the fog itself. She passed through water and air with equal ease, free from any single form. The lake was more than her dwelling. It was a living part of her power. She could calm its surface, call forth fierce tempests, or part its depths as though they were a gateway, showing worlds few witnessed. Rather than rough power, her magic was exact, quiet, and lasting. She was capable of restraining even the mightiest wizards, as she would demonstrate with Merlin. By insight or prophecy, Viviane noticed what others missed. She understood the right moments to move, to be still, or to vanish. Some believed she could glimpse tomorrow, yet she seldom spoke about it. Still, her most striking gift was her freedom from time's grasp. She wasn't immortal as in unable to die, but age and ruin did not touch her. While rulers battled and kingdoms fell, Viviane watched patiently, certain that people would eventually return to magic. She wasn't a monarch or a soldier, but a being all her own. Arthur's realm was new when she rose from the fog to find him. He was a ruler, but had yet to become a legend. He'd claimed his crown by drawing a sword from a stone, but that weapon, Excalibur, was already broken in conflict. Though his right to rule was said to be sacred, the realm still doubted him. His foes viewed him as a mere youth pretending to rule, and even some of his knights wondered if he was strong enough to unite Britain. Viviane had observed him. She understood Arthur's potential, but realized no human ruler could stand without a force beyond himself. He needed a sign, a sacred object, something unquestionable. He required a sword that would never fail, forged by powers beyond man, holding the burden of kingship and the strength of magic. So she took action. Arthur and his knights were far into remote lands hunting a foe when the fog around them grew heavier. The air became eerily calm. Even the seasoned war horses halted, sensing a hidden presence. The trees loomed overhead, their gnarled roots creeping across the ground, while the road ahead vanished into the thick haze. These knights, among the boldest in Britain, felt disturbed, fidgeting in their saddles. Suddenly, the ground was gone. A vast lake now lay in front of them, though it wasn't there just a moment earlier. It spread wide and seemed bottomless, its surface as smooth as glass, unstirred by any breeze. The air carried a scent of rain, yet no storm had come, and an uncanny hush weighed on them, dense and heavy. Then, in the middle of the lake, standing on the water as if it were solid ground, they saw Viviane. Arthur had never met anyone like her. She was graceful, statuesque, both commanding and calm. Her face was pale, untouched by sun or time, her dark hair drifting as if moved by a hidden tide, her robes gleaming like liquid silver, bending light in impossible ways, and her gaze, profound and timeless, rested on Arthur with calm anticipation. The knights muttered uneasily and reached for their weapons, but Arthur lifted his hand to quiet them. Though he didn't know her identity, he sensed her might. She was no common woman, no deceitful phantom sent to trap men. She gave off an aura of something profound, beyond human understanding. Suddenly, the water moved. A hand rose from below, not hers, but another hand wrapped in shining armor like polished silver. It rose with purpose, holding the sword's hilt, clearly not shaped by human smiths. This was Excalibur, and it looked like no blade Arthur had witnessed before. Its blade shone as if sculpted from pure moonlight, its edge so sharp it seemed to slice the air. Strange old symbols ran along it, hinting at a power beyond mortal grasp. The grip was bound in dark leather, and the pommel held a gem that throbbed like a living pulse. This was no ordinary weapon, but truly a monarch's sword. Arthur walked into the lake, despite his knights' worried cries. The water offered no threat to him. As soon as he gripped Excalibur's handle, everything shifted. The air vibrated softly. The surface around him moved in a flawless ring. In that moment, Arthur realized the truth. This was not a common blade, not just a tool for battle. It held a gravity greater than metal or conflict. It was authority, responsibility, and self-sacrifice. He raised the sword, its glow dancing in his eyes. The young man who had drawn a blade from a rock was gone. In his place, there was a monarch. Viviane observed him briefly, then turned away into the fog. Her task was finished. In his place, there was a monarch. Viviane observed him briefly, then turned away into the fog. Her task was finished. Her place was never in the spotlight of mortal tales. Yet Excalibur had a cost. It was never a simple present. In time, when Arthur's rule concluded, Viviane would make sure the sword went back to the lake from which it came. After all, no one, not even a king, could cling to power for all time. The night Benwick fell to flames, Viviane observed from the misty waters of her enchanted lake. She had known it would happen. King Ban's downfall, Lady Elaine's anguished pleas, and a son now without a father. These were fate's currents, always in motion. Still, the future was never fixed. So when fire consumed the castle and troops plundered its ruins, Viviane came out of the lake and lifted the boy in her embrace. Lancelot would never experience childhood among mortals. He wouldn't be raised by squires or stay in royal halls. Instead, he grew up in the lake realm, concealed from human eyes, where time flowed differently than on the surface. It was a land of perpetual dusk, where magic flickered in the air and the stars glimmered on waters spanning forever. Here, knights did not fight over wealth or fame, but were forged for a higher purpose. In this realm, magic thrived, safe from conflict and human flaws. Viviane did not act like a typical mother toward him. Here, knights did not fight over wealth or fame, but were forged for a higher purpose. In this realm, magic thrived, safe from conflict and human flaws. Viviane did not act like a typical mother toward him. He studied not only warfare but caution, patience, and the heavy burden that power brings. Once he could stand, his training began. His form was honed for combat. He handled a blade before he could talk well, taught to attack with speed and accuracy, to block with a reflex that felt natural. He practiced with phantoms, facing magic that made him rely on more than raw power. He learned quiet movement, how to sense the wind, and realized that fighting wasn't just about might, but precision. His mind was guided by knightly ideals. Viviane made sure he studied more than battle. She instructed him in proper etiquette, negotiation, and the fine line between power and compassion. He studied verse and song, mastering how words could wound more deeply than a blade. He discovered how to bow as smoothly as he swung a sword, realizing that a knight's role went beyond service to leadership. Yet there was a lesson Viviane never gave him: love. She had witnessed love ruin mighty men, watched kings collapse, heroes fail, Kingdoms topple over such a fragile emotion. Thus, she shielded Lancelot from it. She kept him within the lake world, free from earthly ties, thinking that if his heart stayed untried, he'd stay steadfast. But destiny is harsh, and even the best enchantress can't govern all things. Eventually, Lancelot's prowess outgrew the lake realm. He was not a boy anymore, but a man, his form honed by years of drills, his keen looks reflecting the calm assurance of one who had never lost. His hair was midnight dark, and his blue eyes were as steady as silent depths. He was the ideal knight, not only a fighter, but a figure destined for myth. So Viviane released him into the world. It wasn't a departure as humans might expect. There were no hugs, no tearful farewells. She just said it was time to go, time to embrace the path she had laid out for him. Carrying only his armor and blade, Lancelot entered the realm of men. He traveled toward Camelot, toward Arthur, toward the story he was meant to shape. Viviane stood by, as quiet as the water behind her, watching him leave. She had fulfilled her duty, forging him into a knight beyond all others. She delivered Camelot its greatest hero, its finest fighter, its most loyal guardian. Yet she missed one key point. Love, the very force she had kept him away from, would be his downfall. Merlin, meanwhile, had long believed that humans could not be trusted with magic. He had witnessed rulers attempt to harness magic, only to lose themselves to hunger for more. He had observed wizards go insane under powers they couldn't master. He devoted his life to keeping magic and mankind in check, preventing them from undoing each other. Then he crossed paths with Viviane. She was unlike anyone he'd known. She wasn't a royal, just an enchantress, or a human dabbling in magic. She was beyond all that. She existed outside time, outside law, and above mortal aims. He felt her strength at once, and she sensed his. Their first encounter wasn't like mentor and student or competitors. It was a quiet agreement, a union of peers. Yet even the world's greatest wizard could err, and his error was to love her. In the beginning, he was her instructor, Merlin the sage, seemingly timeless and all-seeing. He led her into the darkest corners of magic, showing her spells the best druids had forgotten. He taught her to interpret the stars, to commune with the land, to fold time without shattering it. But Viviane wasn't a normal pupil. She picked things up at a rapid pace, taking in everything. She didn't merely rehearse spells. She seemed to inherently grasp them, as if they'd always been inside her. Her strength didn't come from tomes or spoken rites, but from a more ancient source, woven into her lake's waters and the air around her. Then things changed. At some point, Merlin was no longer the teacher. Viviane took that role. She guided him into the heart of the woods, where magic filled the air. She unveiled spells he had never tried, spells that didn't just alter reality, but remade it. She had no terror of magic like ordinary men. She didn't try to command it. She let it move through her, like breathing. And Merlin, despite all he knew, couldn't resist. He'd taken pride in being above mortal frailty. He hadn't yielded to power's lure or let feelings control him. But Viviane was unlike anyone else. He wasn't just intrigued by her, he yearned for her. She was distant, intangible, a power he couldn't hold. She never offered him the devotion he sought, never loved him as he hoped. Still, she kept him near, allowing him to think she might, someday. That was when she took her chance. Viviane understood exactly what she was doing. She had examined Merlin as thoroughly as she studied spells. She noticed how his longing dulled his caution, how he lingered on her every word, how he granted her every wish, expecting it would earn him what she never intended to give. So she requested a final lesson, a spell so strong, so flawless, it could hold the mightiest wizard in existence. Merlin hesitated but ultimately granted her request. Then, before he understood what was happening, she reversed his own power on him. The atmosphere changed, the earth shuddered, and the woods appeared to tighten around them. Merlin tried to act, to talk, to cast a counter-curse, but he was already snared. Some claim she locked him in a tree, his form caught in the old wood, his voice rustling among its leaves. Others say she cast him into a cave where the very walls became his cell. Some suggest she confined him not in space but in time, dooming him to a forever slumber he could never leave. One way or another, Merlin vanished. Why did she do it? Some believe Viviane plotted this all along, taking his knowledge then discarding him. Others say she was protecting herself, aware that if Merlin remained free, he would chase her forever, craving something she would never grant. Some suspect a different motive, that Viviane didn't imprison Merlin out of spite, dread, or greed, but because she foresaw his future. He was warped by magic, he'd existed too long, and he was losing himself in the power he held. His love for Viviane had blurred the line between wisdom and want. Maybe she recognized his path and knew she had to intervene or nobody would. Maybe she didn't ruin him. Perhaps she rescued him from his own downfall. Once Merlin vanished, all shifted. Arthur was left without his key counselor, Camelot lost its wise guide, and the careful balance between mortal life and magic grew shaky. Viviane did not go back to her lake right away. She stayed hidden, observing the world she had altered. Maybe she questioned whether it was the right choice. Maybe she sensed that removing Merlin would lead to outcomes she couldn't foresee. Or maybe she had simply done what had to be done. Not all knights approached Viviane for insight. Some arrived with swords. When she came to Camelot that day, it was not in peace or goodwill. She was there to collect a debt. Arthur once took Excalibur from her grasp, promising her a favor when she called on it. Now she appeared, demanding not riches, not land, nor dominion, but a life. Stories differ about who she wanted. Some say she asked for a knight's head, thinking an injustice still lingered. Others say it was about an old feud. The most popular telling is that she wanted Sir Balin, who she saw as cursed, fated to spread disaster. Arthur wavered. He owed Viviane greatly, but putting a knight to death for no clear reason was cruel, a mark against his reign. He tried to bargain, to replace her request with another gift, but she held firm. A pledge had been given. A life was due. Balin didn't wait for the king's verdict. He never trusted magic or believed enchantresses were kind. He saw Viviane not as Camelot's friend, but as a schemer lurking in the dark, tugging at fate with no concern for those trapped in her plans. Certain tales say she had harmed his kin, though details are long forgotten. Others claim he merely judged her as a liar, someone whose sorcery would only cause misery. He reached for his blade. Viviane didn't move. She had encountered men like Balin countless times, fighters who thought might alone ruled, who viewed sorcery as strange and harmful. Maybe she expected his next move. She might have realized the moment she entered Camelot that it would be her last day. Yet she showed no hint of it. Arthur had scarcely stood to address them when Balin struck. In one swift, brutal move, he drew his sword and attacked. Viviane wasn't helpless. She was a mage of vast might, one who had commanded the forces of nature and even trapped Merlin under her spell. But Balin's blow was sudden, and her enchantments had no time to form before steel met its target. The royal hall exploded in panic. Arthur's knights yelled in shock, some readying their swords, while others stood stunned. Viviane staggered, gripping the gash in her chest, her silver gown stained with scarlet. She didn't cry out. She didn't beg. She merely gazed at Balin, as though sizing him up, already aware of the doom that would soon claim him. Then, wordlessly, she collapsed. Arthur's anger exploded at once. He came down from his throne, his voice thunderous as he asked for an answer. Balin, sword in hand, stood unshaken. He felt no remorse and offered no excuse. He saw a menace and ended it. The gathering was split. Some knights muttered that Balin was correct, saying the lady had interfered with mortal business once too often. Others labeled it murder, a pointless act against the one who had given their ruler his famed sword. Yet regardless of their stance, one thing stood out. Viviane was gone, and magic had lost one of its finest guardians. That same day, Balin was exiled from Camelot, though Arthur could not pass a death sentence on him. Perhaps it was Balin's former deeds, or maybe Arthur sensed the knight's fate was sealed. The sword that killed Viviane was cursed, though Balin didn't realize it yet. That very weapon would soon cause his biggest downfall, dragging him to a brutal end, just like his deed that day. By a grim twist of destiny, he would clash with his own brother, unaware of each other's identities until it was over. As blood spilled, Balin would grasp the cost of his fury. As for Viviane, her remains were taken away, but no one knows her final resting place. Some say she went back to the lake, her spirit melting into the waters she once dwelled in. Others insist her death was a trick, that she simply left the mortal realm and returned to the magical domain where mankind's brutality couldn't reach her. In any case, it was clear Camelot lost something that day. The Lady of the Lake was gone, at least for a time. She had handed Arthur his blade, and when his final hour came, she would claim it once more. Camelot's dream had been fading for a long while. Lancelot and Guinevere's treachery had broken the Round Table's bond. The search for the Holy Grail had taken the kingdom's finest knights, leaving many dead or missing. Fighting against Lancelot had already drained Camelot, sapping its power at Arthur's hour of greatest need. Then Mordred appeared. The conflict at Camlin was not a normal battle or campaign. It was slaughter, a desperate fight between a ruler and the son he had refused to acknowledge. Arthur once believed his realm was eternal, that Camelot would endure forever. But as he stood among his broken forces, seeing his knights die in turn, he saw reality. All he had created was falling apart. Arthur's duel with Mordred was the finishing blow. Exhausted yet firm, Arthur thrust Excalibur into Mordred's heart, killing the would-be tyrant. In a final act, Mordred lashed out, plunging his sword into Arthur. The wound was fatal. Arthur felt it as he stood there, blood soaking the ground, the wind echoing the screams of the fallen. The few knights who survived raced to him. Sir Bedivere was there, one of the last faithful, who had served Arthur from the start. Arthur felt the heft of Excalibur in his grasp. The sword had been his ally from the beginning, bringing him victories and etching his name into history. Yet it was never truly his. It never was. Using the last of his energy, Arthur told Bedivere to take Excalibur and cast it back into the lake. Bedivere hesitated. How could he toss away this royal blade? He'd seen it slice through metal, watched it shine with something nearly holy. Discarding it felt like losing Arthur himself, so he refused to follow orders. 2 times Bedivere fibbed, claiming to have flung the sword into the water, and both times Arthur knew the truth. "You want to keep Excalibur for yourself," Arthur said quietly. "But it belongs to neither you nor me," he continued. "Obey me, Bedivere, just once more." At last Bedivere complied. Holding the sword, he returned to the water's edge, and with all his might, threw it in. The blade twirled, its silver reflecting the fading sunlight as it hit the lake, yet it didn't sink. It was seized. From beneath the water, a pale, slim hand in gleaming silver emerged, gripping the hilt with a poise no mortal could match. Bedivere stood there, stunned. Then, as though the lake exhaled, the hand and sword sank out of sight, leaving no ripple. The surface went calm again. Bedivere went back to Arthur, recounting what he had witnessed, and Arthur managed a weary smile. The knights took the king's body to the lakeside, where a dark vessel was waiting. Mist drifted around the boat, and shapes stood on its deck. Women in long cloaks, faces unseen, their air unearthly. Some claim these were the queens of Avalon, arrived to guide Arthur to his last peace. Others say that among them, quietly watching Camelot's final gasp, was Viviane herself. She had bestowed Arthur his blade and reclaimed it once more. Camelot's vision was over, and the Lady of the Lake slipped back into legend. Once Excalibur was back in the lake, and Arthur was taken to Avalon, Viviane's part in mortal affairs was finished. She had guided rulers and knights, bestowed and reclaimed might, and witnessed Camelot's dreams swell and recede like the sea. Yet her fate after this last moment is uncertain. Some say she went back to her lake, descending into its depths as quietly as she first appeared so long ago. They think she remains in that secret domain, observing from a distance, waiting for the time Arthur returns, when the world needs its once and future king. They claim she still holds Excalibur, safeguarding it until the moment is right. Others insist she left our world completely, for without Arthur, Merlin, or Camelot, she had no purpose here. As the era of magic closed, she withdrew into the haze, leaving only tales behind. Yet, on some dawns when fog blankets quiet waters, when the breeze carries silence, people claim they have glimpsed her. A lone shape poised in the middle of the water, her garments moving like silver tides, her eyes fixed on something beyond mortal time. They say she remains patient and observant, keeping safe a sword that still lives in memory. For Arthur will come again someday, and on that day, Viviane will be waiting.